Welcome into Unbreakable, a mental health podcast with Jay Glazer. I am Jay Glazer. And look, I've talked about needing teammates in my life. And the guy I'm having on right now is one of the baddest motherfuckers who've ever walked the face of the earth. So for all the men out there who are nervous or worried about opening up to other dudes about, oh, they're going to call you a wuss or, oh, it's going to take away your manhood. This is the baddest motherfucker on the planet. And it's one of the guys I call when I'm struggling, when I'm hurting. I call him up and I say, dude, do me a favor. Come on over to the house. I'm struggling today. I'm hurting. And basically come on over and spar with me and punch me in the face so I can feel a lot better. And with that, I welcome in a man whose nickname is the Smashing Machine, who is one of the pioneers of mixed martial arts. He is a former heavyweight champ of the world. He was one of one at one point. He was the baddest dude on this planet. Again, my friend, Mark Kerr. Welcome, my brother.
Hey, Jay, thank you for the introduction. And
Take me to those early days.
oh my God, man, you framed it correctly. I mean, there was very little to stop you from doing whatever you wanted to do. I mean, they implemented really the example I give is, just like Gary Goodridge, they instituted the Gary Goodridge rule. And Gary Goodridge in a fight down in Brazil reached in this guy's shorts, grabbed his nuts, and twisted it as hard as he could. And you could see from the camera angle, the guy just dropped down. And then they go, well, we're going to have to institute that one rule. No nut grabbing, but you're allowed to do everything. You're allowed to do everything else. So it was absolutely nuts, man. I don't think, looking back on it, if I fully understood it, that I probably would have, went ahead and signed on the dotted line. But once you were in it, you were in it. Once I was doing it, I was doing it. If I was doing it, I was doing it from a very primal perspective. It was doing it from, I was going to protect my village. That's the way I felt. I was protecting, it draws out, like fighting in general just draws out in people. I believe their absolute primal nature. And I always thought I had it in me, but until I stepped in the ring is when it was confirmation that I had that in me. That if it came right down to it, I could fight somebody to the death. That's the way it felt inside me.
Why did you need that validation
Um,
for yourself?
because I think as a competitor, I always knew I was competitive. I always felt like, man, maybe I wasn't always reaching the potential that I thought. And I think in the back of my head, I always had this a little bit of doubt of like, really, am I really that, am I that competitive? Like,
A question
I
of your
had,
own manhood?
yeah, absolutely,
Interesting.
absolutely. And
I always love to get the psychology of fighters of why you do, why you step in,
uh
right? And
it,
for,
we talk.
for yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say you talk about like the absolute leaving no question marks about it. Get fight back in those days, man. Fight it all. Fight
Right.
at all. And you've heard me talk about this. I said, regardless if it's in, considered like an amateur or this or that, if you get in the ring, man, you got my respect.
No doubt.
Period.
I don't care if
Period.
you're
And
I don't care if you're 0 and 116. You have no doubt you have respect because you're willing to do something that 99.99999% of the world are unwilling or unable to do.
mhm,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But again, you're doing it at a time when it's not like the UFC was big or anything back then like it is now. So tell me about when your first fight when you go in there. So you're fighting in the unknown because you don't have any film to
Mhm.
really see what's going on. So you get in your first fight, you have no gloves, there's no rules. Tell our people where it is,
Oh
set it up,
God.
and how fucking either
Oh
psyched or
God.
horrified you are.
Um, the reality is when I got down to Brazil. It was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was in the basement of a hotel called the Maxu Plaza. And um, it's this ring, like my first time down into the
Wait,
bowels
how did
of
they find you in the first place?
uh, this local trainer here in town had said, "Hey, I usually set it up like this. That year, amateur wrestling I had just finished in
Right.
1996. I said I was done. That year, working full time as an assistant coach, all these other things, I made $23,000. Okay, the guy that approached me with this fight in Sao Paulo, Brazil, said, "I'll get you $25,000 for one night." So right there, you got my attention,
Sure.
right? And so he ends up saying, "Hey, listen, it's going to be this competition. You're going to be the most athletic." He doesn't really give it much more detail than that. And I'm like, okay, I'll train for it. And he's like, trains me for it. And we get down to Brazil, and it's literally in the bowels of this hotel. And I go down there, like when we first arrived, and it's this ring in this small little, I don't even know if you can call it a conference room. It was more of like almost, it felt like it was like a storage area they had cleaned out to make room for the ring. The locker rooms were just dividers, like partitioners you would put into like an office space. And, he's like, okay. And the rules meeting was just really simple. It was like, okay, they would only allow you to tape your hands down to just short of your knuckles. That was the rule. Like you can use tape on your hands, but you can only tape down to just short of your knuckles.
And how
Literally,
many
it was like
fights? How many fights in the one night were you gonna? Did you know you were gonna have?
I knew I was going to have three. I knew I was going to have
Right.
three, and the way it was described to me is like, "Hey, listen, the fight should be over quick. The first couple, you should." And the first guy they pair me with is, just on size alone, it was Paul Barlins. He's six. Paul's passed away since then, but he's 6'7". He's like 370, 380 pounds. Just we're brainwashed to think bigger is better, and it has nothing to do with fighting. And I hadn't realized that at that point. And I remember looking across the ring from him, going like, "Holy fuck, man, this dude's big, man!" Like looking at him, and I remember my coach just kind of looking at me. He goes, "You'll know what to do," kind of like. Uh, and he was right. I mean, everything at once the bell rang, everything became a reaction, and I just reacted to it, did what I do. I took him down to the ground, just started kneeing him in the face, and that set into motion, just kind of like butterflies are gone. I knew I understood what was going on and knew like the next guy wanted to just get out. And then I ran into the Paul Varlins was a couple minute fight, just bloodied him to just mangled him, and then I fight this other guy, Master Hawk. That was a quick fight. And then Fabio Gugel, and that's when it was like that was an eye opener. That was, Fabio Gugel. Everybody that was there in the audience that night was there for him, and it was probably God, man. They ended up stuffing probably 600 or 700 people in this small little area, and it was all dudes. It was all jiu-jitsu guys, and it was Fabio. And no matter what I did to him, no matter how hard I headbutted him, how many cuts I dug into, how many elbows I threw, he just would not quit. And I mean that like I honestly felt like there was moments where in my head I was like, okay, I'm just gonna headbutt him like 5 more times and then he should quit. And I fractured his orbital, I broke his nose, I chipped teeth in his mouth. I mean, like Jay, you've seen some of the. I mean, it was just it was messy, and he wouldn't quit. He just wouldn't quit, and that was like the introduction to like really like my perception of what I thought tough was. Like he took it to a whole new level of like just didn't matter. Didn't matter what I did to him. He was not going to give up. Incredible.
The again the so when you went into the UFC, how was that different than anything you've
Uh,
done?
the UFC was a little bit more theatrical. It's a little bit more. You know, um,
Which is your first UFC? UFC what?
14, UFC
Okay.
14.
Okay.
And part of the UFC, it's the last couple, to set the stage for your listeners, it's the last couple of tournaments they had. I believe 15 or 16 was the last tournament they had, and then they just switched to individual bouts. People can look it up, but it's one of those where I know they were phasing it out.
Right.
It just,
Tournaments as in you're fighting, three times a night is what Mark's saying. Right.
yeah, and the UFC was it was different, but it was one where it was still run like
Like
it just
like an underground,
yeah,
fight league. Yeah.
yeah, that's basically what it was. At the time that I ended up fighting for the UFC, they had alienated every boxing commission in the United States. The only places they were having fights were Alabama and Mississippi that either didn't have at the time a boxing commission or the boxing commission just looked the other way. It was that much of a shit show for the UFC. It really was.
So now, then you go to Pride, which is in Japan, which is where I don't think we met there, right? I was the broadcaster of Pride. I was the first host of an MMA show in America, national MMA show.
Yeah,
If you take out the girl who what's her name, who hosted the Ultimate Fighter,
that
but I'm saying first
yeah,
studio show. So
yeah.
I did the first studio show. We did it at Fox because I had signed a deal with Fox to do the NFL and UFC. And 2 weeks after I signed, Dana had brought the UFC from Fox. We did a show on Best Damn Sports Show, period. And we
That's
did a
right.
fight
Oh
there.
my
And
God.
then it got moved from here to Spike TV to do the Ultimate Fighter.
Yep.
But it's still part of my contract. People don't know this. That's how Pride got to America, and that's how we got it on Fox. And because it was part of my initial deal with Fox in 2004 is when that
Oh
was.
my God. Wow.
All right. So, but we had to go to Japan and deal with them. And you're basically dealing with the Japanese mafia and, cutting a deal with them. And it was the Wild West. So you get paid 25 grand to fight in Brazil. How much you get paid to fight in the UFC? Do you remember?
Oh, the UFC was 25,000. I ended up
Okay.
signing a 3 fight deal at the time. So then, like the Japanese, it was just
Yeah.
another level. It
And
was
that was
full.
like 6 figures cash.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So, oh, wait, I
yeah.
don't want to put your tax shit out
No.
there. So, but folks,
So,
you'd walk into these rooms when we were doing Pride, and they'd have all these stacks of money stacked up of every like
mhm.
country of fighters, and they'd have like, let's say this guy from England was fighting, and he was getting 200 grand, 200,000 pounds. They'd have 200,000 pounds.
Mhm.
It's like two different like rows of money, right? 200 grand for that guy in cash, and then 200,000 they put like in a pillowcase or a sack or something to give to the Japanese government or whatever it is. I don't know what
Yeah.
they're doing with it, right? And they just push the cash across the table to you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Jay, like they didn't, like you have no background. Like there's nothing in my life to this point which has taught me any kind of etiquette for this, right? Like I don't know what to do. I'm like, it's like it is literally it's written like a Hollywood script because you go in a hotel room, you could still smoke heavily, in hotel rooms. It's usually at the time it was usually at least a couple, 2 or 3 Japanese guys in there smoking cigarettes, and they'd pull your contract around, they'd read it to you, write it, and then they get these, attache cases up, which are square, which fit money in it, currency, and they'd open it up and they'd just start piling out on the, and I like literally, you look at it, and I remember the one time, one of the first times I remember like getting my shirt out, and like trying to like take the money and like scoop it in my shirt. And then I was like, oh man, this ain't good. Like, this is not gonna work, man. Because I still had to go back in the hotel, back in the elevator, which nobody's gonna mess with you at all. They kind of understand what's going on.
It's run by the Japanese mafia, of course.
Yeah, no, so that's when I go and I literally go to the bed, just take a pillowcase and go to the table and scoot it on the pillowcase and literally walk down to my room. So it was by far I mean, it was some of the best times. I can look back on it now and realize that it is, it was at the time, it was just no one can believe. Like, you tell the story to other people and they go, oh, yeah, yeah,
You tell
right.
it to other fighters now, what you and I have done together, and they look at us like, oh, come on, there's no way that could
Yeah.
have happened. That's crazy. That
Oh,
couldn't
yeah.
happen. They're like, oh, no, that's how it was.
No, no,
That's
it's how they operated over here, man. It was standard operating procedure, man. It really was.
well, the other part of this, um, and the other part of all this, when you did the Spanish machine was, look, you had to have, well, before I even get into that, I do want you to tell people, because you've told this to a girl who was fighting for us at Unbreakable. You gave her advice about what your mindset is. So what's your mindset when you get in that ring, that cage, that you would give to every fighter out there? You talked about smelling blood. You talked about,
Oh
you
God,
talked
man.
about, and talk about just the fear, how you deal with that fear.
A lot of it took me a while to figure this out. I call it reframing language. Before I, the anxiety and stuff and all of that, you get, the nervousness and all that. And then I realized one thing, I realized how privileged I was to be able to do what I was doing. And I realized that it wasn't anxiety or fear I was feeling, it was excitement. And it was genuinely, I learned to really appreciate that moment, that all my senses were just getting stimulated to where, um, and it leads me into this. It's like one of the main reasons in a fight I tried to get somebody to bleed, off, like right when we started fighting, because that smell of blood, it kicked in like this primal, you know, Darwinian, feeling of like, I'm defending my life, but I'm defending the village behind me as well, and my smell would be so highlighted, and I could literally stand, you know 20 feet away from the guy I was fighting, and I could smell what kind of sweat he had. I could smell nervous sweat, which is this stinky, pungent, or I could smell like sweat, like just water, salt. It was this weird, and I thought it was weird until I started talking to other people about it, going, hey, yeah, I kind of have the same consistency. Because it's one where it's like, yeah, you're going to tell a story about you smelling some guy's body odor across the room. Somebody's going to look at you like you're a little bit nuts. But, at the time, it was like I could literally smell him. I could smell the iron in his blood. I could just this feeling of anticipation, excitement. It was like this feeling of like just an unbelievable overload of senses, but focused and directed. And that's kind of the areas where I was talking about the fighter. It's like you need to embrace those moments, man. Lean into it, man. You learn to appreciate just that moment, because there's nothing else in your life that's going to give you that.
And even appreciate the fear.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate the moments that cause you to be afraid, because you're doing something that's just so different. And this could translate to other areas of life, like even areas that you're afraid of things. Embrace it. Be like, hey,
Yep.
appreciate it. I'm afraid of this right now because I'm doing something that's out of my comfort zone,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
or out
And
of the comfort zone of the norm.
100%. And for myself, I'm like a late bloomer in what's going on in my life now, and I'm trying to figure all this business stuff out. And it's scary for me, but I can look back on, what it felt like to get in the ring, what it felt like to be in that place of fear or anxiety and understand that it's a privilege still for me. Even though I'm afraid of it, I don't know the outcome of it. I'm still gonna work my way through it. I'm still gonna fight my way through that fear or anxiety or whatever it is, because realistically, it's a privilege, man. It's a privilege to have that. I can sit back and I can go to work at, wherever, and take all the fear out of my life, right? I could, live in a one bedroom shack. I could not have any, there's so many things that I could do to make my life comfortable. And it's just like, you know, to what end? To what end?
The other reason, you and I talk a lot is because we're both fucked up. And I say we're fucked up, but we're good with our fucked upness. You've done more work than I have to learn to be good with your fucked upness. And this was in the Smash Machine. We saw